إن في الجنة نهرا من لبن.
Our fourth session with the Shaykh in looking at the qawaid al-fiqhiyya, and inshallah, so bismillah. Bismillah. So the Shaykh said yesterday we looked at the principle that certainty is not removed by doubt, and he said we looked at various aspects of this principle. We looked at different principles that were actually under this one, and we looked also at the differences of opinions that have arisen because of the various aspects that we can look at this principle. And he said we came to certain conclusions about the benefit of this principle, among which were the fact that the principle benefits in understanding where responsibility lies, and also in understanding when responsibility is not incumbent upon us. And he also said it's beneficial in knowing, for instance, in court cases, that we learn who is the plaintiff or the claimant and who is the defendant, and also in understanding what is permissible from things, food and other matters, the permissibility of things. And also we use it in determining whether or not something is deemed pure by the Sharia or whether it's deemed impure. So taharatul a'yan, which is related to the purity of substances themselves. This principle the Shaykh showed us, and he also said that we looked into how this principle was applicable in our daily lives, and also in particular in these lands that are distant from the majority of the Muslim countries. So the Shaykh said that he wanted to mention, before we go on to the other aspects of it, he wanted to mention one area of difference of opinion amongst the scholars, and in particular an area in which Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu differed with the other scholars, which is related to this principle, and that is the idea of the permissibility of eating living things. According to Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu, he considered everything other than what was clearly made prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His Messenger was halal to eat. In other words, unless it was clearly specified that it was not permissible to eat, then it was indeed permissible to eat. And he said this would include the insects in the earth, the creatures that crawl around. It also would include things that people eat in other places, for instance, dog and wild animals. Whereas he said Imam Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu disagreed with him. Imam Shafi'i said that anything that an Arab would not eat if he was in a good condition. In other words, the Arabs, if they're poor, they would eat a lot of things. But anything that an Arab who was well off would not eat, Imam Shafi'i considered it prohibited in the Sharia. And the reason for that is they differ not on the verse, but on the interpretation of the verse, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He yuhillu lahum at-tayyibat, that He permitted for them the tayyibat, and He prohibited for them the foul things, those things that are foul. And Imam Shafi'i radiyallahu anhu said the tayyibat here mean those things that the Arabs considered like tastatibuhu nafs. The nafs considers it tayyib, and he was talking about the Arab nafs. Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu said this Sharia transcends the Arabs and their personal desires and aversions in foods. This is a universal teaching, and what is haram is not what the intellect or what the nature considers to be a haram. What is haram, in fact, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is haram and nothing else, because the foundation of all things is permissibility. So unless there's a clear reason why it shouldn't be permissible, and he interpreted here, the tayyibat are all the things that Allah has made for the human beings, unless there's a clear prohibition. So this was a difference between Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i about this, and he said that he just wanted to indicate the difference here. The Shaykh mentioned that the khilaf that exists amongst the scholars, Imam Malik radhiyallahu anhu differed with the majority of the scholars in that he felt that the that the prohibition, there's a hadith which the scholars built their prohibition on, and that is the hadith that says that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited the eating anything that had claws, and which include obviously the dog. And Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said that this prohibition, this nahi, was in fact for karahiyya, because there's different types of nahi, there's different types of prohibition for karahiyya or for tahrim, and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu considered that it was makruha. And he said that there's no doubt, like for instance the Koreans, if they become Muslim, and he said that they do eat dog in their culture, then that would be an opening for people that ate dog, even though he said that it's still makruh, it's not something that should be encouraged. But if that's what people do, then it would benefit him, those people who ate the dog in that madhab. So the Shaykh said that the next qa'idah that we're going to look at is the principle al-mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir, which means that hardship brings ease, or difficult matters necessitate facilitation. So the Shaykh said that this is in fact based on the idea that our sacred law is built upon the idea of taysir, or ease, or facilitation in matters. And so anything that is difficult, then the Sharia makes easy. Now this word, if we look at that, al-mashaqqatu, the Shaykh said, is derived from the root word, which is shaqqa, and it's known as a masdar mimi, which is a derived noun using the letter mim in the Arabic language, mashaqqa. And the word jalaba here means to bring or to draw near, and the word at-taysir is the opposite of al-usr, which is difficulty, hardship. So it's ease. And this is based upon verses in the Quran and also traditions of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah desires for you ease, yusr, and it uses that word. And He does not desire for you difficulty or usr or hardship. Also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah has not placed anything of great difficulty in this deen for you. And also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah desires to make easy for you things. And the human being was created weak. In other words, the human being can't take great difficulty. And then also many hadiths that indicate this. The Prophet ﷺ told his Sahaba, Bashiru wa la tanafiru, that to give people good news and don't chase them away, make them adverse to this, and make things easy for people and don't make things difficult for people. The Prophet ﷺ also said that I was sent with this Hanafi tradition that is forgiving and easy. It's something that helps people and doesn't hinder them. And the Prophet ﷺ also said that you were sent as people to facilitate the affairs of people. You weren't sent to make people's affairs difficult for them. And also the famous hadith in which Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was led the prayer, and he went on for a very long time reciting very long chapters until a person who had some animals he needed to tend to actually was forced to leave the prayer. He went and complained to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said to Mu'adh, are you somebody who is going to cause tribulation for people, a person who makes fitna for people? And then he told him, make things easy for people. Whoever leads the prayer, he should have a quick prayer, a light prayer. If you're the imam, then you're supposed to make takhfif for people. So these are all examples of where this principle has come from in the sacred law.
الرخصة سنفسر الرخصة سنعرف فيما بعد ما هي الرخصة.
So the Shaykh said that there are many aspects and also other principles that this principle is based on. So, for instance, Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said that one of his principles is al-amru idha daqat tasa'. That means when the matter becomes very difficult or constricting, then it's necessary to expand it or make it broader. So when things become too narrow and constricting, causing difficulty, by the nature of that type circumstance, there has to be a broadening. And another one also is the famous principle that most people know, that is, necessities allow even what is impermissible. So in times of absolute or dire necessity, even the prohibited is allowed, which is al-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat. And also that necessities are always in commensurate with the difficulty. In other words, you have to look that a darura, you measure it based on how much trouble it's causing. And also that if an affair reaches and transgresses its limit, then it goes back to its opposite, according to Imam al-Ghazali in his usul. And also, one of the things that comes out of this principle is the idea of rukhsa, which in the Sharia means dispensations or licenses to do things that normally we don't do because of hardship. So these are all aspects of this same principle. So the Shaykh said that, first of all, in looking at this principle, we want to look at what the mashaqqa is. In other words, does this principle, if we use it, does it apply to every difficulty? And the Shaykh said that our ulama have divided difficulties into two and then a third. So mashaqqatani, there's two, and then there's a third, a thalith. And he said that the first one is called mashaqqa kubra, which is the greater difficulty. And this is a difficulty that the Sharia has not placed with the devotional act that it's demanding of us. It is a difficulty, a hardship that is not coupled with the devotional act that is being sought from us. And that'll be explained in a moment. The second is a difficulty or a hardship that was part of the devotional practice that was sought from us. So, and then the third one is really a mean between these two. It's a mean between the two, the kubra and the sughra. And some of them consider it to, if it does indeed occur, to go under the rubric of the greater hardship, and others say no, it goes under the rubric of the lesser hardship. So the Shaykh, in order to use an example, he said, for instance, if you go to a physician and the physician tells you you live in a cold house and you've got pneumonia, and the physician tells you if you do wudu in the cold, you're going to get sick and then die. That is a kubra. It's a mashaqqa kubra, because the sacred law did not intend that your wudu killed you, destroyed you. So here is an example where the difficulty or the hardship is something that is not intended by the Sharia. Whereas the Shaykh said, Hafidhullah, that if it's winter time and you're in perfectly good health and it's uncomfortable for you to do wudu, you don't like to do wudu because it's cold, you get cold. He said in that case, it's a sughra, because the Sharia does not exempt you from that. That's part of the difficulty of wudu, that sometimes it's in cold climates, that sometimes it's in a cold season. So that difficulty is not exempted by this principle, because it's actually one of the intentions of the Sharia. And the same is true, for instance, in fasting. If somebody's going to fast and they say, I drink coffee every morning at breakfast, and if I don't drink coffee, I get a headache, that is not a type of difficulty that exempts you from fasting, because fasting has difficulty in it by its nature. You're not eating or drinking, you get thirsty. So that mashaqqa or that hardship is sughra. It's a lesser hardship because it's included in the intentions of the lawgiver. In other words, the lawgiver was aware completely that there will be circumstances that are difficult in fulfilling this obligation, and that's a given. Now, they differ, Imam Malik radiallahu anhu and Imam Shafi'i, in this middle, this third aspect, which is, if you're in a situation where you think that wudu is, if you do it, you might get sick. So you're not really sure either way. You have doubt about it. In this, but it's a probability. In other words, it does exist that if it's cold, and you know by your nature that if you do wudu when it's cold, you tend to get ill. You get the flu in that type situation. Or fasting, you think, when I fast, I get sick. You're not sick now, but when you fast, certain things happen. Your kidneys bother you or something like that. The ulama differ on this, where we place this category. Imam Malik radiallahu anhu considered this to be sughra, a lesser hardship, whereas Imam Shafi'i said no.
نعم الإمام الشافعي قالها كبرى قال عنها
Imam Shafi'i said
الإمام مالك قال كبرى
نعم
ألحقها بالكبرى بمعنى جعلها تؤثر الإمام الشافعي قال لا
What did I say? Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said that it goes under the category of kubra, the greater. In other words, it affects the ruling. Whereas Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said it doesn't affect the ruling. So they're looking at it. The Shaykh said what's happening is in this triangle. It depends on which angle you're looking from when you look at this middle thing. And in this case, the Imams are still in agreement on the principle that mashaqqatu tajlibu taysir, but they're differing on when we call something a mashaqqa and when we don't. And so it's going to affect the hukm.
التيسير
So the Shaykh said that he wants to point out something very important here. And that is that one of the things that people misunderstand about this principle and misuse it is really how we define mashaqqa, which is hardship or difficulty. The Shaykh said that this in no way means that responsibility in terms of what Allah has told people to do is removed because things are difficult. For instance, the Shaykh said that the word taklif in Arabic, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the man responsible, the human being is mukallaf, he's responsible. That the word taklif in Arabic is defined as that which has difficulty or hardship in it. In fact, Sidi Abdullah ibn Hajj Ibrahim in his book on usul called Maraqi al-Saud says that the taklif itself is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obliged the human being to do what is difficult. In other words, what yashuqqu alayhi, it's hard for the person to do it. That is what taklif is. If there was no difficulty, there's no responsibility. So there is some hardship involved in taklif, and he said that it's really important that people do not see that taysir here means removing responsibility. So he said, for instance, there are some ulama who look at modern financial transactions that are clearly prohibited, and they say, well, if we say it's prohibited, it's going to be really difficult for people. He says that that is not a valid reason for doing that, because if you continue to do that, then all of the legal rulings will end up disappearing under a false or a misuse of this principle. So for instance, and he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that we are going to thrust upon you sanulqi alayk qawlan thaqila, a weighty word. In other words, it's difficult to carry this. It's difficult to take on this burden of responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said that it's also important for us to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the human being in all of the human being's conditions and circumstances. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the human being in his wealth and in his poverty. He knows the human being in his strength and in his weakness. He knows the human being in his ignorance and in his knowledge. He knows the human being in all of the various circumstances that a human being can find himself in, and therefore the use of this ruling is subtle. It cannot be simply a blanket type of principle that is applied to hardship whenever people find it hard. And he said, the Shaykh said, that he wants to emphasize that while he wants to facilitate things for people, particularly in lands in which Muslims find themselves as minorities, that they need facilitation in their affairs, but that facilitation should never compromise the sacred law. And this is something that Imam Shatibi, he's mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ said that towards the end of time, holding on to your deen would like be holding on to a hot coal in your palm. In other words, that there will be a time when that's how difficult it doesn't mean that you just throw away the coal because it's difficult to keep it in your palm. No, it means that in fact that is the people that do that are the people that are upholding their deen, are those that feel the difficulty in practicing Islam. So the Shaykh said that Imam Shatibi, radiallahu anhu, the great Andalusian jurist and usuli scholar, who said that the taysir, facilitation, in no way relinquishes responsibility. It does not relinquish responsibility. And the Shaykh said that really this Imam, the Imam here is the only one that pointed that out. Before him that had not been pointed out about this matter. He was the first one to recognize this important aspect of this principle. And he said, unfortunately, a lot of people now are unaware of this. And because of that, they tell people that they can do things that in fact they cannot do based on a misuse of this principle. So the Shaykh said, therefore, what we would like to arrive at is the middle way. A middle way that is neither too lax and lenient nor too difficult and hard. And this is from the aims and purposes of the sacred law. We don't want a difficulty, tashjeed, which is making things too difficult for people. The hadith state that the Prophet ﷺ said, no one will make this deen too difficult for them except they'll be overwhelmed by it. And the Prophet ﷺ also said, don't make things difficult. And also he said, but nor do we want making it so easy that we lose the deen itself. We lose important aspects of the deen by making it facilitating it too much. He said he does not want to be misunderstood. If he makes things easy, that we should make all things easy. No, each particular instance has to be looked at in the total picture. So if some things are made easy, there has to be valid reasons for applying the principle. Not everything should be made easy. And likewise, when the Shaykh gives an answer that is difficult for people, it's also important to understand that not everything should be easy. So it goes both ways, and it's really important to find that middle place, to find a middle place that doesn't lose the mean. And then he said that he wanted to use the example of Imam Malik radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, when the Khalifa came to him, and he said to him, this was Mansur al-Abbasi, he was the Abbasid caliph, who came to Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu, and he said to him, no one remains on the earth more knowledgeable than you or I, but I'm too preoccupied with political matters, so that leaves you to deal with the matters of the people and their religious affairs. So I want you to write a book on the sacred law for the people. And in that book, I want you to avoid the lenient opinions of Ibn Abbas. I want you to avoid the difficult decisions of Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu. and I want you to avoid the strange or more unusual opinions of Ibn Mas'ud. And then he said, so follow that way. And Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, according to the transmission that Qadi Iyad in his book Tartib al-Madarik mentioned, he said that Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, he actually gave me a methodology. In other words, he benefited from the Khalifa in that he gave him a methodology to follow in writing his book, the Muwatta. And then when he completed the Muwatta, the Khalifa wanted to actually force the Ummah to follow the opinions of Imam Malik radiallahu anhu. And in the famous narration, Malik radiallahu anhu refused and said, every city has its scholars. There's room for more than one opinion, and allow the scholars to teach. They might have knowledge that didn't arrive to me like that. So he said there's an example of really avoiding extremes and finding that middle place between laxity and hardship. So in returning to the principle that we're looking at and those principles under it, the first one, and also the rulings that are based upon it, the first one that we were looking at is al-amru idha daqat tasa'. A matter, if it becomes too difficult for people or constricting, then it's needed to be expansive or expand it. You need to open up, loosen it up. He said that this expression comes from Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, and he mentions it 3 times. The first time is in relation to a certain type of container. It was a clay container that was used during the time of Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, and the two of them differed about this clay container. It was an unfired clay container, and in carrying things that were impure in it, what was asked was, could it be used for wudu? If it was cleaned, could it be used for wudu? Because this was so widespread, because an unfired clay obviously absorbs things in it. Like if there was alcohol or something, it absorbs it into it. So he said, if Imam Shafi'i, when he was asked about this, he said, al-amru idha daqat tasa'. When things are too difficult, the matter becomes too constrictive, then it needs to be, ease needs to be made, needs to become broader. You need to have a broader approach. And the point is because this clay pot was so widespread in use, that to say that no, you couldn't use it would be too difficult for a lot of people. So he used it there in that principle. The second one was in a fly. Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu was asked about a fly, and obviously people know that flies spend a good deal of their time in impure things. That if a fly comes down on the clothes, what do we do? Do we consider that there's something impure there or not? And he said that as long as there wasn't clearly on the wings or something like that foulness that gets on the clothes, that al-amru idha daqat tasa'. Because flies in the desert, there's a lot of flies. They'll always be landing on people's clothes. It would become too difficult for the people if you started making them be concerned about whether or not the fly had something impure on it. And the third time that he used this expression was in relation to a woman living in a distant land who has no guardian. She has no legal guardian. Now, the Shaykh said, as you know, that the Imams, they differed on whether there's a guardian or not is necessary. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu said that a woman, in fact, does not need a guardian to marry herself. She can take command of her own affair and marry herself once she reaches adulthood, because he said, one, that there was a hadith that he built it on, which is a woman has more right to her guardianship. And another one, he used an analogy, analogical reasoning, the qiyas, saying that if a woman can buy and sell property, then she should be able to also give away the word used for a private part and used also for goods is very similar in the root. So he said if she could sell her wares or her merchants, she could also marry herself, making her private part permissible. Whereas the other three imams said no. And they based it on the hadith. A marriage is invalid if it doesn't have a guardian, which is a sound hadith, even though it's not in the two collections of Imam al-Bukhari or Muslim. It's still a sound hadith, and they built it on that. So that's a difference of opinion amongst the imams. But the point being that Imam Shafi'i himself, although his own madhab, and the dominant opinion of his madhab is that a woman does not marry herself, that despite that fact, he was asked about women who were in distant lands and did not have guardians, and he said this statement: if the matter is too constricting, you need to open it up, make it easier for people. So he answered in the affirmative that she could indeed marry herself. So we saw from that then that it indicates that in order to facilitate, an imam might even leave his own opinion, the opinion that he considers to be the appropriate one, like Imam Shafi'i in the case of marriage, and go to the opinion of another imam or actually just another opinion in order to facilitate for people or make things easier if the difficulty warrants that. The next qa'idah or principle that goes under this general principle that the Shaykh wants to look at is ad-darurat tabih al-mahdhurat, which means necessities permit what is impermissible. And he said first we need to identify what a darura is. What is a necessity in the Sharia? And the necessity is defined in Sharia as anything that if a person does not do it, he will destroy himself or he will come very close to destruction. In other words, it's either that he dies from it, or he's very close to dying, one or the other, and that's what a darura is. And the Shaykh said that under this ruling, then you get what is known as a rukhsa. And he said, but a rukhsa or a dispensation, a license to do something, is when a ruling changes because of a clear reason. In other words, there's a clear reason. The reason has to be absolutely clear in order for the ruling to change. And if not, then it's not. And he said that this is taken from the Quran itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He has clarified to you everything that He has prohibited you to do unless you're forced to do it. Unless you're forced to do it. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that about even disbelief, uttering disbelief, unless somebody was forced to do it and his heart is sound. Or if somebody was forced to eat what is normally prohibited and he's not doing it out of transgression or some wrong action, but because he was forced to do it, there's ittirar, there's a darura there. And so in those cases, the Shaykh said, for instance, eating carrion, dead carrion, meat that has died other than by being ritually slaughtered. In that case, normally that meat is prohibited. But the Shaykh said that in order for you to save your life, if you're in a place where there's no, you have no food and you're starving and you come across a dead carcass, then in that type of situation it's permissible for you to do that, because normally it would be prohibited, whereas now you're either near dying, or if you don't do it, you're going to die. So you're in a situation where there's absolute necessity. And then he said also wine. If somebody's choking on something and the only thing available was alcohol, then they could drink that alcohol. If somebody was in a place where they actually got something stuck in their throat and all there was in proximity was a glass of wine, they could use that to force that down. And then the Shaykh said, although there's a difference of opinion about whether or not wine or alcohol can be used as an actual medicine, that there's an area of difference. And then the Shaykh also said, rhetorically, does this mean that every prohibited thing is allowed in times of necessity? And he said no. The Sharia, our scholars have not permitted everything to be allowed. He said that those things that do not relate to other people the rights of other people are permissible, but not something. For instance, he said, if somebody held a gun to you and said, if you don't kill this person, I'm going to kill you. You cannot kill that person. You have to be patient and take what comes, because one person's life is not over the other in that type instance. So you have no right to kill him because of a necessity and then say, well, I was under extreme duress because they told me if I didn't kill him, they would kill me. That does not hold up according to the sacred law. And also fornication out of need, like to complete poverty, because a lot of the reason that people go out and prostitute themselves is because of extreme poverty. And one could argue, well, they're in extreme need. They have no other way of gaining livelihood. No, in this case, it's not permissible. It is not permissible. Now, or to be forced like fornication, something like that. Somebody's forcing you to fornicate. It is not permissible. And the reason for that, the Shaykh said, is that in distinction to kufr, because he said somebody might ask, it seems strange to me that you're allowed to enter into a state of kufr outwardly and deny your iman if you're forced, under duress, threatened to be killed, and yet somebody can't kill another person under the same circumstances. The Shaykh said that the reason, or fornicate, the reason for this is because iman has two, it has an inward and an outward, and its reality is inward. So in reality, your heart is the place of iman, not your tongue. So a person can say something with his tongue and his heart holds something different. And that's why the Quran says that if he does say that kufr out of force, his heart is in a state of iman. And so that is showing the ascendancy of the heart over the tongue. And that's why Allah permitted that. And so he said, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ, during the time when they were being tortured, one of the Sahaba came to him and said, Ya Rasulullah, that he was being tortured and threatened. And he had to say things about the Prophet ﷺ that he did want to say. The Prophet said, how do you find your heart? And he said, rejecting it. In other words, what he was saying. And he said, then if they continue to do what they did, you continue to say what you said. And also, the Shaykh said about Khubayb, who was being tortured also. And when they were torturing him, they said to him, don't you wish the Muhammad ﷺ was now in your place instead of you being tortured here? And he said, no, by Allah. I would even rather take a thorn in my foot than he took a thorn in his foot. And so he said that, in fact, rejecting the faith, even like the ulama have said, like Khalil radiallahu anhu says, that it's better to be patient. In other words, this is a rukhsa. You're permitted to do this, but it's actually better to be patient. So if somebody threatened to kill you if you didn't curse the Prophet ﷺ, it would be better to die a martyr than to do that. But because of the weakness of human beings, Allah has given them this dispensation to do that. But it's a higher thing not to do that. And this is what many of the Sahaba that we know of in their stories, that they did that. So the Shaykh said not every darura goes under this category. When we say al-darurat, tabih al-mahdurat, we're not speaking about every darura. This is called a darura fiqhiyya. It's specifically related to legal concerns of the Sharia. That's where the necessity comes. Another aspect of this, which is a sub-rubric here, is ad-darura tuqaddiru biqadriha, which means that what is necessary is always determined by, the necessity is determined by what is necessary. In other words, what that means is that, for instance, in what you're going to use, which is prohibited in normal circumstances, you only use what the necessity dictates that you use. You don't use more than what you actually need. So, for instance, with alcohol, if you needed to clear your throat or something like that, you don't drink. When you drink it, you don't keep drinking once you've got the thing out of the throat. And also, the Shaykh mentioned, like in using alcohol in remedies. If a lot of remedies, medical remedies, have alcohol in them. The Shaykh said that the ulama have differed about this, and he said he tends to incline towards permissibility, which is his personal inclination. But he said, nonetheless, it means that you would only use absolutely what you needed from that medication, and then when you got the desired results of it, you stopped using it. You wouldn't continue to use it, even if it might be beneficial. Once you got the results of what you needed, you shouldn't increase in that. And he said also, another example would be a woman, or for that matter, a man. If they go to the physician, we know that sometimes a physician needs to examine a person in their and see their nakedness, be exposed to the physician. If, for instance, a woman was suffering from a part of her body, it's very common in this culture, the breast, for instance, that what would be permissible would only be to show that physician the area that he needed to see. It would not be permissible for the patient to strip naked, whether a man or a woman, because that's prohibited in Sharia. In other words, ad-darura tuqaddiru biqadriha. If the necessity is one area, if they have a hernia in a place, the necessity is in that area to be examined. The physician doesn't need to examine the whole body. He might want to do it, but he doesn't need to do it. So the point is that you limit it to only the what is commensurate with the necessity itself. So the amount that is permissible is commensurate. That's a better way of looking at it. The amount that is permissible is commensurate with the necessity itself. So he said it's almost like a common sense. It's the amount that's needed to remove that hardship. So the Shaykh said, for instance, if you had to expose your nakedness to a physician because of a necessity, it doesn't mean every time you go to that physician it's okay to expose your nakedness to him. Well, I did it once and he saw what I look like, now I'll go again and do it again. It's not permissible. Or, for instance, he said if you've got a problem on your arm, which for a woman is she shouldn't show a man that, but if the problem is on the arm, you don't take off your dress or something like that. He said it's only to the degree that's necessary and that removes the hardship or the difficulty. And he said, and this includes also eating. He said the darura has it's a specific degree. A necessity can actually be, obviously, I mean, it's not exact mathematics, but it has a degree that can be measured with the intellect. So that's what you're looking at, and that is the degree that's permissible. To extend it beyond that degree is not permissible because it's not necessary. It's not a darura. And so the Shaykh said, when the necessity is removed, then what was impermissible becomes what was impermissible before the necessity and becomes permissible because of the necessity, returns to its original state of impermissibility. Once the necessity is removed, you return to the original state of impermissibility. And he said that in relation to medicines, medications, things like that, then it would be the doctor who's going to determine how much you take or you need.